Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Brian Aylward. I am the Senior Director of Academic Operations here at UAGC. I will be the host for the session today, which I'm very excited about. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, we have enabled live transcription. If you would like to use it, click the live transcription button on the bottom of your Zoom window. Now, I'm pleased to introduce you all to Dr. Nicole Villarreal to kind of go through a presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My presentation today is Advocacy por Latino, or you can say Latinx. It's research perspectives on non-traditional students and sustainable success. So let's get started. There we go. So my name again is Dr. Nicole Villarreal, and I'm a UAGC student advocate. I've spent nearly 20 years working with diverse individuals, ages 5 to 95, in various clinical capacities. My therapeutic work has focused on helping others to identify their life narratives toward defining their individual values and meaning of their lives. I've included a photo here of my younger self as a reminder of my own academic journey and my commitment to being a voice and an advocate for the Latino community in the best way that I can. So I'm glad to be here with you today. So my overview for this presentation includes defining non-traditional students, obstacles and barriers for our Latino students, institutional barriers for our Latino students, Latino values. I put Latinx because it's inclusive, so I can say either one during the presentation. What motivation and support can look like from the lens of the Latinx student, and finally, building bridges for and with our Latinx students. Once again, I just want to make note that the use of Latinx throughout the presentation is as a gender neutral term, where the focus really rests between the Latino identity and its intersection with female, male, transgender, genderqueer, and gender nonconforming. And then Latino, Latina is used in accordance with specific author use. So let's begin with non-traditional students and how this term has been defined in the literature. So historically, non-traditional students were defined categorically based on the amount of non-traditional characteristics they had. Horn and Carroll defined non-traditional on a continuum based on the number of characteristics present. So students were considered to be minimally non-traditional if they had only one non-traditional characteristic, moderately non-traditional if they had 2 or 3, and then highly non-traditional if they had 4 or more. And these characteristics were described as delayed enrollment into post-secondary education, attending part-time, financially independent, working full-time while enrolled, having dependents other than a spouse, single parent status, or not obtaining a standard high school diploma. So the literature also tells us that a non-traditional student is normally 25 years of age or older. Furthermore, in the context of Latinx non-traditional students, the literature highlights intersectional identities, in addition to those mentioned, that Latinx students must also navigate, such as race, ethnicity, class, and then being a first-generation college student. And these are really important factors to know, as they are the identities of many of our Latinx students. So now let's take a look at some of the obstacles and barriers that exist for our Latinx students. We know that the transition to college is really not linear, and the fact that the educational trajectory of students of color is really often messy, and students shift back and forth from the mindset of college to their personal worlds of home, work, their community, their native country, and even their peers. And there are also psychological obstacles. Many studies have shown that, Latinas and Latinos college experiences are really fraught with dissatisfaction. There's a lot of cultural incongruence and disappointment with pursuing further education, all of which really impact their retention and their persistence. Other studies have found that Latinx first-generation college students experience additional barriers to college completion, such as institutional invalidation and microaggressions. Socioeconomic status is another one. Latinx students often have to work to help their families survive, and they have multiple demands on their lives that prevent them from being fully engaged. Socioeconomic status has also been found in the literature to be a significant factor in lower student retention when it is representative of low income paired with first generation status. In a study with about Latino student college completion, the researchers there found that Latino students operated entre mundos, which means they operated in multiple worlds. So this included their personal world and then a new world of college. And so in doing so, they dealt with very, very specific and very complex dynamics. And there's quite a few, but I'll just go over two briefly. And so one of these is liminality. And that's really an in-between space where, Latinx students can find themselves really being caught and pulled toward more than just one way of being and doing things. And it's really an experience of feeling that we're neither here or neither there. So in this transition to college, these students are trying to adapt to a new world. We're really trying to stay connected to their older one. And they can experience both these highs of excitement and being in college and learning new things, and really lows, loneliness and doubt about, they often say, like, is college really worth it? Is it really for me? And the second is choque. And that is when Latinx students move from their familiar cultural realities into the context of college, which can be very foreign. So they experience, and I encourage everyone to go and read Azaldúa, what she calls choque, or this cultural collision. And this has been, substantiated by scholars who've noted that there are cultural mismatches between low income and upper class cultural norms. They really create a social performance gap, and they can reproduce social inequalities. And it's really like an individualistic type of norms that are set that are opposite of the collectivistic values that Latinx hold. Let's move on here to some institutional barriers. And so we must also acknowledge that there are institutional barriers that exist for Latinx students. And these are normally in the form of a cultural deficit model. And this model is also known as having deficit-oriented thinking or holding a deficit-based narrative. Deficit-based thinking is centered on the grand narrative that Latino communities as a whole, they don't value education. The belief that low-income communities are inferior. There's a pervasive view that most, if not all, low-income students are at risk, they're marginal learners, and they're culturally deprived. So Ornelas and Solorzano, they previously had defined this deficit thinking as negative perceptions, assumptions, generalizations, and beliefs that are held by some faculty, staff, and administrators toward marginalized groups. And these viewpoints they're really rooted in the idea that marginalized groups lack certain qualities necessary to really be successful in higher education. And so the question is really, how does that impact the lens from which our Latinx students are viewed? And despite the fact that there's plenty of sources of information that can impact our perception, a lot or much of our view of people in general becomes, it comes from one of the greatest influences of our current time, right? And it's increased with not just the mass media, but with also social media. These deficit perspectives become very clear in these messages that we see. And they often highlight negative portrayals of Latinx people and immigrants as well. And then that's just furthered by the research as perspectives that Latinx students lack something. And that something is mentioned and it's noted in the literature, and it's often regarding academic motivation. And that's really the reason given for failure. So, according to Rendon et al., some of those narratives that educators might have and do have about Latinx students are that they're incapable of learning. There's this belief that they're not college material. They speak with accents. They are high risk. They're disadvantaged. They're underprepared. And once again, they're culturally deprived. And these negative perspectives really have power, right? They have a power over many people. And so these deficit views, they're not only opinions of individuals, but they have the power to impact the way that Latinx students are treated within education systems. And this has real consequences for policy and for practice. And they shouldn't be regarded as harmless. So these deficit perspectives that have dictated the discourse, within the Latinx K through 12 and college, often failed to really recognize Latinx cultural and, family strengths and what those are really about. And I think it's very important to kind of bring up a few and acknowledge and understand that the values are important to Latinx students. And we're not talking about 100% because there are differences within the group as well. But these really provide insight into the sustainable success and what part of that's rooted in Latinx beliefs and their values and their culture. And like I stated before, these deficit perspectives really rise from failing to recognize cultural and family strengths. So some of these 5 values are emphasized upon in the Latinx culture. And the first one is familismo, which is a value that's based on close family relationships, both nuclear and extended. And that is the collectivistic culture that I'm talking about before. Personalismo, which is the values based on just personal relationships with others that are not just focused on benefits, but they're deep relationships. Simpatia, which means kindness. And this holds that interactions with others are pleasant. They avoid conflict when possible. Respeto is respect for those with higher authority and age or social power. And then the collectivismo, which is, once again, that collectivistic nature. It's really about the group outcome, and it's not about just one person. So let's just move on from there. We'll talk a little bit about how those cultural values really kind of translate into motivation and support, and more from the perspective of the Latinx student. So what do they want? What does the literature say that they want? And some of that lies in that they want cultural congruity, right? They want to know that the values of the institution really match theirs. And so some of this research has said that the sociocultural factors that account for Latinx perseverance toward degree completion include self-efficacy, support from their peers, their family and faculty, and a real congruence between their personal goals and then the goals of the institution. For example, there was here Edmond and Brazil, they did a study on GPA and showed that the GPA among the Latino college students was found to be associated really with the perceptions of their university environment, and that those students who earned lower grades were often in a really cold and unwelcoming environment. And that kind of really shows, and it suggests that when they're shown that Latinx students are valued on campus, and that they have these experiences with university personnel, that they're invested in their success, and they're more likely to just adjust well to college. They want to feel a sense of belonging. This is really defined as this student's perceived social support, right? A feeling of connectedness and this experience of mattering or feeling cared about, which I would say most of us would want to feel, to be accepted and respected and valued, and the importance to the group, right? And others. And that means faculty, peers, and the campus community as a whole. UC has asserted that administrators really needed to consider and underscore the importance of fostering these environments where students felt safe and comfortable engaging meaningfully across cultural and ethnic and racial and socioeconomic, gender, and sexual orientation differences. The research has also documented that taking classes related to racial and ethnic or gender diversity issues was, and it had a positive effect on the nature of cross-racial interactions and faculty-student interactions as well. And they want to feel a sense of purpose. So these Latinx students want to really make those meaningful contributions to their families and community and society as well. And in one study, the sense of purpose really had to do with Latinx students recognizing their role in relationship to others and really seeing that connection between themselves and these others really unfolding for them. And so this desire on top of that to be a role model and to achieve this academic success was really a source of motivation. And really, despite the contribution to even just American society, there's the research really shows that for the Latinx community, they're not really seen as examples to be imitated or looked up to. And so for others in that same study, they had also found that a sense of purpose was really related to what the participants described as their contribution to family. So once again, that success as a whole, right? Not just for the individual, but for the group. And this really included that they give back and return that effort that either their parents or sometimes their partners had put into supporting them. Another sense of purpose was also found in liberatory pedagogy. So this is really an educational environment that works to undo inequity and injustice. And this is kind of thinking out of the box even more, right? We're going back to the 70s and really that education had to transcend this idea of just this banking model of scholars just, putting the information into the student, and then the student would just memorize and then repeat this like top-down official knowledge in order to achieve success. So this is really different in a way that instructors and professors and teachers in general must really make these explicit, the contradictions and the challenge and the multiple ways that school really shapes students, right, in a political and in a cultural nature. And so through an ethic of care and compassion and validation, faculty and staff can really liberate oppressed students from these self-limiting views about their ability to learn and to help students find self-worth. For Latinx students, they can really begin to define themselves and as competent and as competent college students and find their sense of purpose. So how do we build bridges? How do we do that collaboratively as leaders? And so I think it really, in order to effectively change institutional narratives on a larger scope, there really needs to be an acknowledgement of how the Latinx community is viewed. It's really a call to action, right? It requires leadership to disrupt their deficit views in order to have an impact and to encourage their administrators and staff and faculty and students to really do the same. And institutional accountability, it's key to reflection and reassessment of current practices. So I guess the next question is really what can we do? What are some of those things that the literature is telling us? And we can really start. We can start by increasing the representation of Latinx faculty. A lot of the literature, says that the greatest impact in the student to faculty relationship was really when both individuals were from the same ethnic group. Other studies, found that for Latinx students who perceived a student-centered faculty really had opportunities for interaction that were, motivating for them to persist. If we look at that small data graph there that I included, and this was just actually recently shown during a news broadcast, but it is 2019 data, and it's from the National Center for Education Statistics. You can see that there's a gap there. It's the third one where we have, and I did Los Angeles County because that's where I live, but you can see that almost half of the students are either identified as Hispanic or Latino, and only 11% of the faculty is the same. So this is really kind of a visual, a true visual of the importance of increasing Latinx faculty. And why is it important? Well, the faculty of color really serve as role models, right? They encourage this academic success, and they help facilitate career goals for students from similar backgrounds. They can facilitate increased comfort in academic spaces and feelings of empowerment among, racialized students. These students of color can perform, significantly better in campus environments where they have the same or similar ethnic and cultural backgrounds as their instructors. Once again. So to continue with that, we can also increase our Latinx leadership, right? So I go back here, in 1991, Sagaria and Jones-Rood stated, this is quote, "No need is more urgent today than the full participation and achievement of minorities in education." And really, here we are, over 30 years later, and this educational leadership is really still working to improve the educational status of Latinas and Latinos at all levels and all areas. In higher education prior to 2000, Latinas and Latinos were described as continuously facing organizational challenges where advancement opportunities were really unseen and these barriers were persistent. And, Latino and Latina executives in higher education have also been described as really scarce in college and university leadership. And this is really a problem because it results in having fewer role models for our Latinx students. And in the literature, it's right there, this important outcome is really the lack of representation within these levels. And it's really at the failure of higher level administrators, really recognizing the urgency to improve student success for these Latinx populations. There was an article and a study that was done on factors that Latino students face before entering college and then through their college experience. And out of that, they really referred to the need for institutions to ensure that Latinos in positions of power were necessary. And they were necessary in order to shed light on some of the issues that this population is facing within the institution of education. And if this didn't happen, our Latinx students they won't become a priority to the institution. On the other side of that, it was noted that, having more diverse faculty will return, in return, it promotes the cultural awareness. And these faculty, they serve as a role model, faculty and staff. They're role models and they're a point of contact for many of these students. Lastly, we can build these bridges through our recruitment of Latinx students. And I found this to be really out of the box. I hadn't read anything about this prior, and I thought it was really interesting. But there was very few sources to examine to really discuss how we market to our Hispanic and Latino community, or how they identify as Latinx. And then what kind of communication strategies that we use in our approach. And that higher education really has continued to reinforce this colorblind approach to educational delivery. And it really forces an objectivity, and it imposes these standards of communication, which really failed to acknowledge cultural differences. And so for Latinx, the family strengths and that familialism is really culturally specific, right? It's a really strong identifier. and it focuses on family values and loyalty and the consideration of family and the community needs over the individual needs. And so these cultural traits really, they present challenges to students who they must balance these family responsibilities and with the pursuit of, in their pursuit of a college degree. So marketing and the promotional materials that do not acknowledge these cultural responsibilities are really, if they solely focus on individual achievement versus the benefits of an education on family and community, they're really missing the mark. So it's really incorporating those values into that marketing. And it also means that the higher education marketing professionals really need to focus on both the social transformative function of students as well as the economic purpose of the institution. And they need to have trustworthiness, right? They need to have integrity and accountability and a desire for the advancement of others and oneself. So quality recruiters are also I read they're a really big contributing factor towards student enrollment, and that those recruiters themselves, along with faculty, staff, and the administration, should really be intrinsically motivated to increase diversity and should have that ability to connect with diverse ethnicities. So in closing, I mean, really this is pretty much about, I like to take a historical approach when I do anything and talk about things and present things. And, when you look at all of this information, which spans over 48 years of research from 1971 to 2019. And I think that's a really important takeaway, because if it spans over 48 years of research, we're still sitting here talking about this again. And so how does that motivate you to make change? And what do you need to do and contribute towards that change? And so lastly, I think really what these scholars are trying to say is that we need this validation-rich institutional culture, really taking account for differences while building community. This really means that culture of care, right? That the culture should also foster a sense of belonging. There's critically engage these questions of inequalities and of race and social injustices and validate these minoritized students. I really build on their assets and not the view of just being a deficit. So this is really the sustainable success for Latinx students. And I believe that concludes my presentation. Right on time.
That was fantastic, Nicole. Thank you. I know we've only got a minute here, but did anybody have any questions or anything they wanted to ask Nicole?
And they can always reach out to me too. I don't mind having any dialogue or conversations or anything.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Nicole, and thank you to everyone that was able to join today's session. We encourage you to attend the next keynote presentation. You can locate all that information on upcoming presentations through the Whova app, and enjoy the rest of TLC. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Nicole. That was great.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.